There's no vote. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome all the first technological park. We have a great honor to host Dr. Hernando de Soto in Georgia. It's his first visit, as I know, Georgia. And welcome to our country. It's great pleasure that today in the technological park that we provided a very interesting session about the mystery of capital. Thank you very much again, the organizers of BitFury Georgia and all other participants that we now have this great person here in Georgia. Now it's your please.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm not my usual self. I'm a victim of Georgian winds. I spent the last few hours in Azerbaijan, and the rest in Istanbul, waiting for the winds to subside and we made here. I've been asked to talk to you about the issue of capital, what it has to do, among other things, with regradation. And I will try and get into it in little bits and pieces as I read your faces and try and see when there's too much astonishment, and try and figure my way out through that one. When I came in to Georgia, people, and same thing happened actually even in the United States this time. I usually come in and I make connection with a person at the migrations, and they ask me where I come from, and I keep on saying, well, you know, I'm Peruvian, and they say, you don't look Peruvian. You look Lebanese or you look Georgian, but you don't look Peruvian, and that starts a conversation going on. And I explained that some of my folks came from Spain, some of my other folks came from Italy, and then gradually they got together and somebody took a boat, and then they say, look, that's enough conversation. What I want to know is who you are. So show me your passport, and that ends the conversation. Because at that moment, I am not me, this is me. Actually, it's not me, it's about me. You see, I myself say nothing about myself. When you take up a passport, it tells you all sorts of different aspects about oneself. And that is the way we human beings tend to communicate in very large amounts where we're beyond asterisks and obelisks, or everybody knows everybody else in town. The way you identify people is this. This is the identity. This is what puts it together in a universal language if it's well done. And the trick, of course, is how it is well done. The picture's got to be standardized in one place. There's got to be a description, origins, the seals, the passport. Tells you everything you need to know about me, the moment I'm traveling, and how it will lead to other things. You get to the hotel, and the first question, of course, is, will I be able to pay the hotel? And that's what they ask, how will you settle your bills? And then you go out and say, well, look, you know, Peru has gone through some hard times. Not all Peruvians are very honest, but I come from an honest family, and we will pay, and promptly. And they say, look, we don't really care, just show me the visa. So I show them visa, which is a document, and that document tells everybody that I can't pay. And it circulates worldwide, and it's standard. The first thing that all of this tells you is that documentation is important. Good documentation is important. It reminds and certifies to everybody that it is a fact that you can do something. In the old days, I was looking at a dictionary the other day, the British etymological dictionary, which tells you what the definition of a word was 4 centuries ago, 5 centuries ago, and what it is today. And there it used to tell you that a fact is something that happened. Did I meet George Kirkpatsy 5 years ago? Yes, I did. That's a fact. But today, a fact rather has juridical language. It is a statement. It's a statement about something that has been tested for truth and has been laid out in a statement that is certified by an enforcement authority and that can be executed for a certain purpose. That's a fact. And documents actually create facts. Now, to go a little bit further on this, and I'm thinking now as we go along that we will go from more philosophy, because that's where it comes from, and then get down to the concrete facts. But in the question of philosophy, when Ludwig Wittgenstein, the Austrians, these people are very good at music, and they're very good at putting things into a nutshell, understanding something, and you have for it to be able to travel. And when he was asked to summarize what the universe was, he said, the universe is things in relationship to each other. Things that are in relationship to each other. In other words, they're not disconnected. Now, what I surmise from that is that the universe is composed of two things and relationships. And while things can be photographed, there's George, I can see him, you know, out there are the mountains that surround DC, a relationship, what goes on between him and me regarding commercial deals and what's going to happen in the future, that cannot be put into a photograph, but it can be documented. And so what a record-keeping system does in the West, it's about the 18th and 19th century, it's basically the description of relationships. It is the description of what makes two things come together. And those things are very important because you see, the world of progress is essentially the world of joining things. There isn't one thing in this room that is the result of one person making it. Doesn't exist. And we could be in India, we could be in Bangladesh, or we could be in Zimbabwe. Everything you see that we use is a combination of things. The internet is a combination of millions of things. Pocket phone is an integration of thousands of things. Karl Marx used to say that a locomotive is the integration, proof of the Industrial Revolution, that there are 5,000 things that brought together, they can produce, putting in water and boiling it, an engine steam. So everything that you have, the more complex it gets, the more value added it gets, is the result of bigger and better combinations. Now, what Karl Marx, who was extremely influential even today in many parts of the world, also said is that that combination is the result of expropriated work by laborers. which to a degree is probably right. I mean, it depends on the price, it depends on the salary. But more than anything, it is the result of innovation, of people thinking that one thing can be added value to, and then its value is useful to the world, and as such, increases. So the whole idea behind the capitalist system is that it is not stagnating. It is a system that allows people to trade and combine things, make relationships between these things and these talents, and from that combination, you get that additional value. This was even very clear in the United States, though they did not associate it to capital in the 18th and 19th century, when Thomas Jefferson, an outstanding philosopher president, used to present himself as one of the members of the very big Jefferson family. He used to emphasize that in his family, he was not just an ordinary family member, he was the nail maker. He made nails. In other words, he said, in a way, that he did not give substance, but that what he added was he joined things to make substance. In those days, when you crossed the United States, as the Americans decided to kick everybody out and move towards California, take away the Frenchmen, take away the Spaniards, take away the Indians, take away the Mexicans, and bang, get into California. They got there by cutting down trees and putting the logs together. But there was no industry of nails, so you had to make your own nails. Not like today where you get a wire and you just cut it. So you made the nails, and once you decided to keep on moving, you burned down the whole structure and recuperated the nails. Because essentially, what was important was joining things. And knowledge is essentially about joining things. Because things were given to us. If you're religious, by God, and you're not religious, it's a mystery, but it was there. We didn't do it. What we do is we bring things together. And the knowledge that is required to bring things together, nails, screws, cement, is essentially the knowledge that allows you to make the relationships to increase the value of things in such a way that we can get to the moon, and one day we'll get to Mars, and one day we'll get beyond that, but it's always the result of joining things. Now, people who saw some of this coming was, of course, the French and the English at the time of the Industrial Revolution, because when they wanted to know something about whatever it was, in the old days, all you had to do was visit that village, and you would go to the parish, and you would pick up the records, and you would say, okay, George wants this, Hernando wants that, he owns this land, and that would give you information. But the Industrial Revolution is about joining not only the products of one village, Asterix and Obelix, but joining the products of many villages, of the global economy. And that is why what actually characterizes a developed country is the management of complexity, not the question of how many resources we have. For example, I'm Peruvian, and we have cocoa, which the Swiss don't have. We've got sugar from cane, which the Swiss don't have. And we've got the coffee bean, which the Swiss don't have. And we've got the ingredients and the kiwicha and all sorts of other things that can be added to make very nice chocolate that the Swiss don't have, but they have contracts. And they know who owns what. And their deals stick together with contracts. And that's why, if you want good Peruvian chocolate, you go to Switzerland. And that's also the wrong why, if you want to see how good our metals are, you don't go to Peru, you go to Switzerland, because they bring it together, and the rubies and everything in a particular way. And the rich countries of the world, whether it be Switzerland or whether it be Japan, are essentially countries that pull things together. And therefore, what you need to pull things together is knowledge about things. And as concentrated as that knowledge is, it's better. So the whole Industrial Revolution is really the result of Napoleon, then the Germans, and everybody moving around to get the best record-keeping systems. That's why he was so much feared as he ran through Europe, Napoleon, because he wanted to make sure that everybody who owned something was on the record, and he called it the registro foncier. And the oligarchies, of course, feared him enormously because they said, this is a terrible man. He wants to put down the rules of how you own things, and we like it when the rules are flexible to the top and not to the way down. So if you think about knowledge, knowledge is everything you can remember. If you don't remember it, it's not knowledge. So the question is, how do you create a system that remembers and that adapts to a changing reality? And when you do that, then you are not only able to capture the thing, which is relatively easy, but the result of the value added of the relationship. Let me give you an idea. I'm dehydrated by my friends here, so I have to hydrate. We in Peru have a lot of minerals. Originally, the Europeans, thank you very much. This is European class act. In the States, nobody would have brought it there. It's Mediterranean act there too. But anyhow, what we have is a lot of minerals. Now, according to our laws, many of them influenced by Marx from a long time ago, many of them influenced by the Spanish form of conquest, indigenous people owned their assets communally, collectively. They have a collective title. That's number one. Then number two, what they, in terms of property, what happens is that we separate the wealth of the land on top from the wealth of the land below. So the government owns, I don't know how it works in Georgia, but the government owns the subsoil. And the people who live on top, mainly communal and villages, own the top. So what government does is it gives the property of the copper or the gold or the rubies or the oil or the gas or the uranium to a company that just wants the subsoil. But then when it has that, it has to go to the community and say, I need to get the topsoil because I'm not going to be able to go down to the subsoil in the bowels of the earth unless I create buildings and perforation and channels and tunnels at the top. So it buys. Now, when it buys, it goes to the community. And it says, I know you're a community, so I want to buy the communal title. And then the Peruvian Indians, like the Indians from India, like the Zulus from Africa, like the Tunisians, like the Egyptians, say we got a little problem here, which is, that's what the law says. But in reality, we already parceled out among ourselves individually many decades ago. The problem is that the laws and the description of the country is written up by intellectuals trained in Lima University or Lumumba University or somewhere strange, and we insist on the collective ownership. So the law says you have to deal with we, the community chief, but in practice, everything belongs to individuals. So every time I've gone to a community, whether it's India, Africa, or Asia, and I say, oh, is that not a beautiful collective pig? The people say, it's not a collective pig, it's my pig. So you say, that's a very nice house. Let's have a good collective sleep tonight. It's not a collective sleep, it's a house that belongs to someone. So you start finding out that in most of the world, the records do not reflect what is reality, and they can turn it around. So then that's the reason why Westerners have sign bilateral investment treaties with people like Peru. You've got bilateral investment treaties. Am I on the right track, sort of? So have signed bilateral treaties with us saying we accept Georgia and its customs. The customs are wherever we don't do it right globally. And that's why, for example, an American firm put a huge gold mining operation in Peru that only the first stage is $6.5 billion. And that huge thing is the result of buying illegal parcelations of property, of assets, putting them together under a judge of the peace or an expert of the Ministry of Agricultural and Indigenous Relationship, and those papers are added to the official paper of the collector and then sent to the United States, all taken care of by bilateral investment treaty. So I cannot buy individual property within a collective in Peru, but Americans and foreigners can, because by treaty, which is a higher legal level, you are able, using customs, to put the bottom part of the land, which is legal, with the top part of the land, which is mostly illegal, but it is customary, and putting it on a piece of paper that can be recognized outside because it's defined by treaty. On top of that, the Americans have created, very wisely, a fantastic organization called OPIC, Overseas Private Incorporation, which takes all these little bits of paper of poorer countries, puts them together, ties them up, and gives you one paper instead, say, you got the whole thing. That means that the investor who's buying title, there is no such thing as an investor who does not buy title. Mr. Marriott, when he wants to do a hotel here, he doesn't say, here's the money, like Donald Duck's uncle, Scrooge McDuck, who takes all sorts of coins and throws it. He says, here's the money, and you give me the title. So their all investment is the purchase of a title. It's not generosity. It's worse, I would admit it. So what they do is then they go to the New York market, they go to the London market, they go to the Paris market, they go to the Toronto market, and they say, have I got a beautiful deal? I mean, I've really got a beautiful deal. It is that you can buy something that's Peruvian and by the bilateral investment treaty between Peru and the United States that has been sanctioned by OPIC and certified by the International Chamber of Commerce of Paris. The Peruvian government, if there is ever a problem, cannot protest internationally because it will be guided not by Peruvian law, which is corrupt, it will be guided by international arbitration, which is much less corrupt. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? Everybody thinks it's beautiful. It's even more beautiful than you think. Even President Obama cannot touch it because he's not the president of Peru. If it were in the United States, he could say, I don't like that mine there. I want to put a hospital, and it's called eminent domain, you're dead. And none of that's going to happen. So this is heaven on earth. I need $6.5 billion. And everybody goes out and says, it's a good deal. Let's give them the $6.5 billion. But where does it come from? Back in Washington, there's a lady that runs the Fed, that's a Central Reserve Bank of the United States, that her name is Janet Yellen, and she has to issue enough liquidity, paper money, or on which government has a monopoly, to make sure that there's enough liquidity so that people can buy and sell, so that you can combine things and create value added. That's what they're doing. And so she doesn't limit this issue. She just has macroeconomic numbers. And those macroeconomic numbers tell her that you need $6.5 billion. It's okay, because it is backed up by a solid property asset. And so she issues $6.5 billion. She issues that, and whoever's the owner of the mine in the United States gets a $6.5 million. And there's where the money is. And with the $6.5 billion that they got, they now own a mine that they paid $50 million for in Peru. So what does that tell you? What that tells you is that whoever owns the paper owns the mine, not who's sitting on the ground. Because Peruvians have got 50 million and they got 6.5 billion. In fact, what's happening with these international treaties is that those that have mechanisms of contracts and records that can even assimilate property that comes from the outside are essentially people who have got the who have got the technology to be able to get the facts inside in such a way that the world recognizes it. If we Peruvians had done the titling ourselves, we would have gotten closer to the $6.5 billion. We may have even issued the money in pesos or soles, but we don't, because we have very poor contract, and we are much more interested in the sociological reality that the Amerindian was always exploited by Spain, by Portugal, by the United States, by England, and they have a right to live in communities, and diversity is the name of our game. And we have culturally the right to show ourselves in the 110 colors that are great about Peru, and that's why our women are more beautiful and our men are more macho. That's where we are. They get the picture. So one of the reasons that I'm really very interested in what BitFury may be able to do in Georgia is that basically you want to run your own country, at least that's the way I see it. And what I see about blockchain is that you got a system that is secure, and you've got the technology, and you've got the prestige rate. So the question is, will it be able to pick up all the assets, and will everybody be able to believe it? Because the moment you do that, you become like the Swiss. They'll take our chocolate, they'll take our sugar, they'll take our milk, and you will own it. Because you will have captured capital. When Karl Marx was asked at one point or other he's probably the best guy to understand capitalism. Not the best conclusions, but some of the best analysis. He said capital comes from Latin, the head. And capital is because it's something that you capture in the head. In other words, everything that you see is itself, that's the thing, and its potential. Its potential when it is joined to other things to develop additional value. And what actually a good recording system that is hard or impossible to tamper with fraudulently does, it allows you to capture capital. If I ask any of you, and I hope so far my questions always work, do you have capital? And you say, yes, I have a little savings here, or I have this and that and the other. I will ask you where it is, and you will always come back with a piece of paper. Capital travels in descriptions on paper. It is the definition of something with such precision and in such a way appealable that it happens to be what brings things together. So when somebody says, you know, the Americans love to say, Main Street, the economy is good. Financially, we're not doing so well. But the real economy is doing well. That's not true. The real economy doesn't, the real economy is finance. It is the paper. It is the property. That is nature. That's environment. And per se, it doesn't say anything. The real economy is how we get together to exploit it. So also, if you get your records right, you will know when there is some kind of an attempt against the environment, you can find who's accountable. If you do not have a map, you will not know who's poisoning the place. I mean, we have it in the Peruvian jungle. I mean, we are the source of the Amazon, and you've got all the area of Brazil, and there's a lot of very big damage being made to the environment, and we know where it comes from. What we don't know is who owns it and who's accountable. Because there's a lot of people saying the universe belongs to everybody. Okay, but who's accountable? We don't know. Then you got a problem. It's the same thing if what you're doing is persecuting terrorism. When we in Peru were fighting terrorists, our biggest problem is we didn't know where they lived. And every time we saw an American film or a series. I think you've got it in, you have in, or did you have at least at some moment or other in Georgia, I think it's called Miami Vice. Did you ever have that? These two very good-looking American policemen who are always looking for a Colombian or a Peruvian like myself. And they get in a car, and the beautiful blonde comes out and said, Hernando, big drug trafficker. Where is he? That bad man just went to 353 Stewart Street. So they get in the car and they catch him. But he's no longer there. And this beautiful brunette girl comes out and says, that bastard. He's 5 miles away from here. Say the two good-looking Americans. And after 45 minutes, including commercial, 1 hour, they catch the food. And they put him in jail. Okay. They do this all the time. When 9/11 came in, and the Trade Center towers of New York were being bombed, everybody that was in the conspiracy in the United States was caught. Because they had records of the hotel, they had records of lodging houses, they had records of schooling in aeronautical engineering, of driving. They had the information. In 3 days, they caught everybody. But Osama bin Laden, who used to live in a cave, it took 9 years to catch him. So when you get the records, you get value added, but not only in additional value regarding an asset or the creation of capital, you get a society that can be policed instead of fighting a war with military. You can get a clean environment. If you want to, for example, get investment or you get credit, credit is from credere in Latin, which means I believe in you. I believe in you because you have something to lose. And that's what you use your house, you use whatever you have, and you put it in. And therefore you can get credit. If you want capital, you put all the value of your house into the parts of a contract, and you sell them one at a time. Those are called shares. Those are little pieces of property that people then invest in. No property over anything, no capital, no credit. That doesn't happen. Nobody throws money if they don't receive some form of a title in exchange, whether it's by treaty, or whether it's by local law, or whether it's by their own law. Do you want to give water services, or you want to give electricity to everybody? You know where the houses are. But the real problem, we lose 36%, or we used to lose until we changed, 36% of all the water and electricity supply because we didn't know who paid the bills. And it takes time to collect money that extracts it. So essentially, a recording system, and especially one that is based on blockchain, and in an adaptation to the status of countries that have only just begun the transition to a market economy, is essentially about the creation of knowledge. Knowledge that is actionable, that can be applied. Because the Industrial Revolution, which is a process that began 300 years ago, 200 years ago, is essentially the transition from operating on a little scale to a large scale. And that involves information. And if you go back and you read the very badly boring books of the people who did this transformation, you will see that that was their concentration all the time. One of the persons I had just come across was Thomas Jefferson, already having been president again in 1819, who said the biggest challenge the United States is going to face in the future, and right now, is fictitious capital. Fictitious capital being capital that is just paper, but is not tied to a treaty. It's not tied to a real transaction. When Jefferson said this, Karl Marx was 1 year old. He took it later, and on the basis of that, pretty much created the communist conception of the economy, where he talked about fictitious capital and the way that capital steals from people. Jefferson's view was you can't do away with the paper, but you got to make sure what is the way that we can nail what paper says in such a way that it's uncontroversial. And so the reason I'm in this venture with my Georgian friend is because I'm very curious to see how you're going to capture it. Because I also think that that's what hits the nail on the head. If you know what's yours, and you know what adds value to me, and you know that a passport is essentially about meaning, it's meaningful. I am not meaningful. My meaning comes from a description of me. You don't look at the body and say, oh, here's Hernando, he's got 1,200,000 cells. That's not interesting. What you look at Hernando is, and you ask, what is his DNA? How do those cells come together? And that's the idea of recordation. It looks powerless, it looks boring as all hell, which it sometimes is, but essentially what it does is it tells you how we come together because we are all the result of agglomeration. How much have I talked so far? Because I'm running out of subject.
Thanks a lot, Mr. De Soto, first of all. Thanks for coming. Now we'll show the brief movie describing the essence of blockchain technology, and so after that we will have the opportunity to ask some questions to Mr. Hernando, and we'll have a brief question and answer session. Thanks a lot.
What if there's a technological advancement so powerful that it transforms the very basic pillars of our society? A technology which fundamentally influences the way that our economy, governance systems, and businesses function, and could change our conceptual understanding of trade, ownership, and trust. This technology already exists, and it's called cryptocurrency. People often think of Bitcoin as only virtual money or a transaction system. But if you look closer, you'll see that the monetary aspect is just the tip of the iceberg. That's because Bitcoin is a groundbreaking internet technology for which money is merely one of the possible applications. Money exists to facilitate trade. Through the centuries, trade has become incredibly complex. Everyone trades with everyone worldwide. Trade is recorded in bookkeeping, and this information is often isolated and closed to the public. For this reason, we use third parties and middlemen we trust to facilitate and approve our transactions. Think of governments, banks, accountants, notaries, and the paper money in your wallet. We call these trusted third parties. This brings us to the essence of Bitcoin. Bitcoin software enables a network of computers to maintain the collective bookkeeping via the internet. This bookkeeping is neither closed nor in control of one party. Rather, it is public and available in one digital ledger, which is fully distributed across the network. We call this the blockchain. In the blockchain, all transactions are logged, including information on time, date, participants, and amount of every single transaction. Each node in the network owns a full copy of the blockchain. On the basis of complicated, state-of-the-art mathematical principles, the transactions are verified by the so-called Bitcoin miners, who maintain the ledger. The mathematical principles also ensure that these nodes automatically and continuously agree about the current state of the ledger and every transaction in it. If anyone attempts to corrupt a transaction, the nodes will not arrive at consensus, and hence will refuse to incorporate the transaction in the blockchain. So every transaction is public, and thousands of nodes unanimously agree that a transaction has occurred on date X at time Y. It's almost like there's a notary present at every transaction. This way, everyone has access to a shared single source of truth. This is why we can always trust the blockchain. The ledger doesn't care whether a Bitcoin represents a certain amount of euros or dollars, or anything else of value, or property for that matter. Users can decide for themselves what a unit of Bitcoin represents. A Bitcoin is divisible in 100 million units, and each unit is both individually identifiable and programmable. This means that users can assign properties to each unit. Users can program a unit to represent a eurocent, or a share in a company, a kilowatt-hour of energy, or a digital certificate of ownership. Because of this, Bitcoin is much more than simply money and payments. A Bitcoin can represent many kinds of property: 1,000 barrels of oil, award credits, or a vote during elections, for example. Moreover, Bitcoin allows us to make our currency smarter and to automize our cash and money flows. Imagine a healthcare allowance in dollars or euros that can only be used to pay for healthcare at certified parties. In this case, whether someone actually follows some rules is no longer verified in the bureaucratic process afterwards. You simply program these rules into the money. Ergo, compliancy up front. The unit can even be programmed in such a way that it will automatically return to the provider if the receiver doesn't use it after a certain amount of time. This way, the provider can ensure that allowances are reported. A company can control its spending in the same way, by programming budgets for salaries, machinery, materials, and maintenance, so that the respective money is specified and cannot be spent on other things. Automizing such matters leads to a considerable decrease in bureaucracy, which saves accountants, controllers, and the organization in general an incredible amount of time. The programmable open character of Bitcoin allows us to completely rebuild and innovate our financial sector and our administrative processes, make them more efficient and transparent, and significantly decrease bureaucracy. But there's more. In an Internet of Things, our economy will be dealing with machines that actively participate in the economic traffic. In fact, they're already here. Think of a vending machine, or drones delivering packages. These machines are unfamiliar with the concept of trust, but Bitcoin is not. Because of Bitcoin, the drone can be 100% certain that it will deliver the package to the right recipient and know for sure that it's been paid for. And we can program the vending machine in such a way that it will automatically keep track of its supplies, order new supplies from the supplier, and pay for them automatically. Of course, you'll understand that this is only the beginning. Internet technology is disruptive and breaks the status quo. It opens markets and breaks the positions of middlemen all the time. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies have caused a paradigm shift. It's time to explore this new technology constructively and critically, and openly discuss potential applications.
Thanks a lot. I guess everybody understood everything here, so now we're getting to your questions. So I will be in this question session, so please.
Thank you. I shall introduce myself for the question. Yeah. Thank you, sir, for your lecture. I'm Tim Watalava, apparently the UNDP consultant on human rights issues here in Georgia. I previously worked for the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Justice of Georgia. And my question is related to the financial deregulation. To what extent do you think that the financial deregulation that was initiated in the United States in the late 90s and culminated in the world financial crisis of 2008 still poses the challenge to the global economy through the fraudulent transactions of hiding predatory lendings and unsustainable loans and collateralized debt obligations, AAA rated by the leading rating agencies, and then leading to the bubble and collapse affecting the world markets. Do you think the financial deregulation, to the extent that it is now in the United States, is sustainable? Thank you.
Can I take two questions? It would be yours, and I have a question myself. Before I get to yours, because that film was going on about very good film, and really good, simple to the point. I was looking at all the trees out here, so I asked my host that we have a lot of forests in Georgia. I'm sorry, I like the country pretty much, but I don't know it well. He said, oh, we have forests. So I asked, did you make pencils? And I understand that you didn't make many pencils. All right, it's not a wonder. You see, to make a pencil, you need a forest, first of all, to know how to cut the wood and reforest. You You need machines to cut it down, you need machines to kill the wood, to dry it expertly, so that it doesn't bend anymore. Then you need other ones to make sure that you're able to select the trees that you can cut in a hexagonal fashion and cut through and make a bowl, just so that you get a sandwich in which you are able to put the graphite. Before doing that, you need to dye the wood pink, because most people don't like white wood in their pencils, they just like pink. That's the way we are. And then you have to buy the graphite from Sri Lanka, but the graphite breaks. So you have to import 6 types of wax. The principle comes from Candia, Mexico. This is an American company called Me, so that it isn't so brittle and it doesn't break. And then you've got to put 6 layers of different lacquers, because people like to use the pencil to twirl with their fingers. Then you make mistakes when you're writing something, so you want to erase. So you need basically oil from Saudi Arabia, which makes good erasers, and you need a couple of acids from Germany to make sure it's black and it's pink. Then it has to be held to the pencil, for which you need a little film of metal that is made of black nickel from Nigeria, zinc from Peru, and copper from Chile. So by the time you have a pencil, you need 17 countries. 17. So you better know who owns what, because otherwise you'll have wood, which will never make pencil. Other people will make the pencil for you. So this is simply to put aside what happens if your recording systems and your rules in Georgia are able to put all the parts of everything together and facilitate contracts and get it going. That's the way success is built. That's the way industrial success is built and value added. Now, your question, let me ask you a question before I answer. UNDP. Now, what does your question have to do with what we're talking about today? It's a friendly question, mine. Why do you bring it up?
Absolutely nothing, to be honest. Well, to the extent that human rights also affects inclusive economic institutions, maybe loosely, but nothing direct.
Okay, just wanted to know. Look, if in the United States in the year 2008, BitFury would have been running the Central Reserve Bank of the United States, that crisis would not have happened. Now let me explain why. This is an exaggeration, of course, because I don't know if you want to be a central banker. This is more or less it. In 2008, all of us woke up as a gentleman who was the Secretary of the Treasury, called Hank Paulson, told everybody, look, we have funded subprime homes, that is to say cheap homes for the poor in the United States, and we have the house, we have the title to the house, we have the mortgage to the house, we have the secondary mortgage, and then we have credit default swaps to guarantee the mechanism, and credit organization, ways of organizing it, and 16 generations in which the house and the paper then get cut up into little pieces and end up in Wall Street as securities. Now what's happened, says Hank Paulson, is that we're on the verge of a world collapse. Because all of a sudden people do not want to pay their subprime mortgages anymore, they become too expensive. And if that happens, our calculation is many of the big banks will go down. So we need money. So they go to the US Congress, address Nancy Pelosi, and get on their knees, literally to the point that Nancy Pelosi asked, "Are you a Catholic? What do you do underneath? I need $1 trillion. To be precise, I need $780 billion. Because what I want to do is take all that subprime bad paper assets and take them from Wall Street by cutting all the bad assets and taking them out as if it were a cancer. And that's why I've created an organization called the Troubled Assets Relief Program. And so that's what I'm going to do. And Nancy Pelosi and the US Congress give them $1 trillion. That's a lot of money. The whole world economy is $60 trillion. The United States is $15 trillion. So giving him $1 trillion is huge. So 3 weeks later, Hank Paulson comes on TV again. I'm in Cairo, I'm looking at television, not understanding much of what's going on, and say, well, we got the 780 billion, nearly $1 trillion. What I decided that we're going to do is not go out and get out the troubled assets, but actually give loans to support the big banks. What a change of strategy. I mean, it's one thing taking bad paper for which a bank is responsible, than to give the bank money for having held bad paper. I mean, banks are supposed to know what they're doing. But that's the way it went. Now, at that time, I used to be consulting with the White House. A specific contract I had that had nothing to do with finance. It had to do with problems in third world countries. But since I had contacts, I mean, really at the top, I couldn't help asking, when I was meeting with my interlocutors, another 2 weeks later, tell me, sir, why did you not just simply go out and buy the bad paper, the troubled assets, get them out? Why did you go out and support and bail out those who are responsible for making a bad investment? And the reply is, well, you know, Hernando, we were not able to find the paper. So more or less the story, the way I get it from 2 people, it's not my specialty, but I believe I'm on the right track. The one is Chris Cox, who was the head of the Securities Exchange Commission, and the other one, Alan Greenspan, who used to head the Fed before, was essentially that there's about $600 trillion of paper that we don't know where it is and what banks are at fault. And that's because there is no recordation of derivative paper. In other words, we know that there is a bit of this and that and the other, but we don't have a picture, and we don't know who's got the background. And so the things I'm telling you about are not things that are necessarily shared by 21st century economists. If we were back in Jefferson's time, if we were back in Karl Marx's time, if we were in Adam Smith's time, if we were at the initiation of the big crisis of 1930, we would find that they would say records are crucial because otherwise you don't know who's doing what. So that deregulation that you're talking about that occurred and that actually happened and was compensated by the Frank Dodd reforms now is essentially one that takes us away from transparency and accountability. If, for example, the US Congress were to say, we want to put derivative paper on blockchain, you'd know the truth. They're forgetting record keeping. And the reason they're forgetting record keeping is because I think that they pass it from the culture of people who are concerned with property rights to the financial people who don't know much about property rights, but want expediency in making deals. And it has to be passed. And so instead of getting somebody in the States or in Europe, Western Europe, that can explain to you what's going on, they pass it to the financial part, where there's a guy like Nouriel Rubini who explains everything in great detail and simply overwhelms you. But the real issue behind all of this is there is no such thing as a market that works if it isn't based on knowledge. Markets are not swimming pools in which you sink in the dark, and whatever you do, money or whatever it is, you need bookkeeping. You need to know who's accountable for what, or how are you going to calculate a risk, or how are you going to cure a problem. So this issue of bringing in transparency and good accounting that is not managed by political hands goes way beyond development. It goes into the ongoing crisis of 2008, which continues today. So I think your question is very relevant.
Thank you.
I'm a diplomat, so I didn't get all the details of your conversation in my lecture, but I definitely support the logic out of the conclusions you made. My question relates to this area which your lecture reminded me. We introduced and talk about comparing the Western and the non-Western cultures and why West is succeeding and the others not. And he called it, I checked it, first 6 killer applications. One of them is property rights, definitely. Another is competition, then modern medicine, consumer society, work ethic. Those are biggest divergence, because of great divergence between the West and the others. If we do it in Georgia, this project, what you did in Peru, I'm aware of in other countries in terms of property rights, how that can change the situation or how successful they can be if the other big differences are not dealt with in competition or all those other big differences between Western free market societies and non-free societies. How separately that can be successfully do by here or there.
Non-traditional society.
Yeah, because you talked about this comparison. Why can't capitalism treats in the West and tells elsewhere, right? And one of the key points why it's successful in the West is, of course, property rights as well. But how separately that can be dealt with by societies like in Georgia, if other elements are not dealt with by the governments or by the societies.
Other elements such as what?
Yeah, such as with capitalism, consumer society, competition, not corruption, etc. Why we may be so optimistic about the success of this project? Why we may be so optimistic about this project, for instance, or in any other country?
The reason why you would have to be optimistic is because you are no longer going to see just a tree, you're going to see the potential of the tree. And the potential of the tree is going to be reflected in the value of the block of the chain or the bit in the coin that reflects people's view of what is going to happen. There's something else. I mean, the whole basis of a market economy is trust. You have to know that the other person is telling the truth. You have to know who they are. You have to be able to get their track record. So how well you can expose your knowledge or your data as to who is who has where and who has which hand in whose pocket, you're going to get a more transparent market. What happens in developing now, this is, by the way, not a process to which the West came as a result of a plan. It just stumbled. And it has been very doubtful for many dozens of years whether the Western system is the best. That's why communism arose, because it challenged. It said, yeah, we need an industrial revolution, but look at all the crooks that work in the private sector. It's all better if it is managed by a dictatorship proletariat run by the Communist Party that's going to run everything. So let's have industrial revolution, but let's have to make sure that government is behind it and solid. And that's the reason of many, probably the world wars to a great extent, and certainly the Cold War. What the West has done, also not exactly knowing what it's doing, but trial and error, has been to put into these elements of memory aspects of justice. So the law doesn't only say who owns what, but tells you under what conditions you own. And makes it easy not only to make a good deal and make a lot of money, but to stop a crook. It gives you all that. So the West has understood from Marx that people don't only like wealth, they like a fair deal, they like equality. Or they want to know that everybody has the same opportunity. It's a fact. The moment too much concentration of wealth takes place, out comes Mr. Piketty, out comes the Pope, out comes Mr. Bernard, name of the presidential candidate Sanders. He says, this is unfair, and people react to it. So the idea here is not that you're going to separate yourself from morals. You're going to strengthen the morals, provide you with the law. That's the general idea. So far, you know, this thing of the Industrial Revolution is not a one war, a one deal, because we are 7.3 billion people in the world, and the guys that have got some kind of security to the title over their houses, their automobiles, their deposits in the bank, IT and Facebook, it's the owning of a protocol. It's not even a thing, it's a protocol, it's a system. Okay, are 2 billion people in the world of the 7.3. 2 billion people can do global business. That's North America, say Canada and the United States, 4% of the world. Western Europeans put another 5%, 9%, and then there's 91% that aren't really there. Of that 91%, there are elites, probably most people here, like me, who are westernized, so we know how to move in this, but we are approximately 30% of that 90%. So 60 to 70% of the world, in reality, is nowhere even close to it. Now, we know they want to come in. That's the part that's important. We know that they want to come in. And so we've got to find quick ways to bring them in, to record their assets. And to give, I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea to talk about in 2 minutes, the Arab Spring. We have done a study on the Arab Spring. It's on film in PBS now. It cost a lot of money. And it was the result of seeing, you remember when the Arab Spring began, it began with a man in Tunisia, self-immolating, right? Whose name was Mohammed Bouazizi in Sidi Bouzid in Tunisia. And when he lit up, he didn't light up alone, as what many people think. He lit up with another 63 people nearly simultaneously in every Arab country. And we got the films of what happened when they were committing suicide, because, you know, when you light up, you're obviously not committing a gentle, pacific, discreet suicide like a Roman emperor. You get a warm bath and you catch your veins, and you disappear, float away into the arms of whoever it is, of Venus. When you burn, it's like Joan of Arc. It really hurts. And it's because you want to make a statement. So we got all the statements. And all the statements, there wasn't one about religion, there wasn't one about politics. It was all about, I have been expropriated. I am not given the chance to compete in the market. I have no resentment, which is the Arab word for capital. I have no resentment. That's what they said. We have it on record. And when the mother and the brother of Bouazizi were asked what was the message that they thought the first self-immolator wanted to tell the world, he said he wants to tell the world that the poor also have the right to buy and sell. That's a pretty big statement. The poor want to have the right to buy and sell. At the time that he self-immolated, Mohammed Bouazizi had nice shoes, white socks, blue jeans, a basketball t-shirt, a t-shirt and a basketball jacket, and he had short hair. That's to tell you, from my point of view, that the Industrial Revolution has hit the Arab world. Don't get lost in the past. One of the problems I have generally with Western Europeans and North Americans is that they read too much books. There are times when humanity changes right to the side, and it's very little to do with the top. That's the Industrial Revolution. I mean, you keep on seeing rich Americans, rich Swiss, technological Germans, speedy Englishmen. After a while, you say this must work, and that's what's actually happened. And that is a result of the fact that they possess enormous amount of information, and they have solid contracts and solid property that are well managed, not as well managed as they could be, but that's what's behind it. So, well, what I'm telling you is that this is basically the forefront, and that it is the result of the winning of the Cold War. I mean, look at what happened, because you were all involved in it. I mean, in my country, if you want to win a civil war, you go out and you shoot a lot of people, right? You stop the streets, you do something violent. Well, all you guys, you didn't shoot one shot. I mean, to take away Romania, the system just went complete and collapsed. So the time has come to close your books and open your eyes. And one way of eye opening, I sound like I'm selling vacuum cleaners, but I say frankly, that it is a mechanism of good bookkeeping, because it's all about a world made up of exchanges. And you gotta know who owns what, and who has done bad deeds and good deeds.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're short of time, so 2 more questions, and we have some more meeting scheduled. So please, 1 minute and second.
More here, Dr. De Soto. Thank you so much for giving me time and thoughts. I think your thoughts can be very helpful to this country if they are properly heard. My name is Archie Bakuradze, and I'm a founder and a chairman of a microfinance organization. So we give a lot of loans to micro and small businesses, including farmers. So if you go to one of our farmers and see the fragmented small farm, or people who do not have courage to invest in one particular direction because keeping it small is a way of dealing with the risk. And you ask them, okay, what is your land? And they show you, this is what you see is my land. So do you have any document to prove it? And answer is no. So aren't you concerned? How do you prove that it is yours? And the answer is, come on, everybody knows that. You know, at the moment Georgia is undergoing the land registration reform. The issue is sort of very interesting. It's very sort of dynamic. But the thing is that the farmers are not necessarily interested to move from these people's or barking dogs, as you eloquently say, law to the real formal law, because all of a sudden they need to pay taxes. I mean, they think they have to pay taxes. In reality, they don't need to pay taxes. They think that if they are in a formal framework, they don't know whether this is curse or blessing, you know? So I have 2 questions here. One question is this: how to persuade farmer to move to this formal environment, formal framework? So essentially, how to make our farmer accountants, yeah? This is one question. But another question is also about generally rule of law and legal elites, which you very nicely describe how far usually they are from the people's law, which is the case in Georgia, you know. 25 years of independence, we still have got a system of judiciary and a rule of law which people feel this is theirs, you know. In Georgia, we have a word law which has 2 connotations. One is law as a set of acts, papers, and law as a something like equitable law. I mean, essentially what we understand in English on the term. And it's assumption that what is written on paper, the laws which are adopted by parliament, used by judges, might not be equitable and fair. That's 2 different things. And if you ask Georgian judge which one you buy, how you make decisions, they say, I work by book, whatever is written. It might not be equitable, it might not be fair, but I have to do it whatever is written. So we have a fundamental problem in our system of rule of law. So my second question is how to bring this legal elites and formal laws closer to people. In Georgia, I will finish by this. In Georgia, we have this term restoration of justice, which is nobody doesn't like the term. But the thing is that we've never had it. absolute justice. And the idea is how we shall move as an independent country now from people's justice to the real formal shared justice. Thank you.
Well, the first thing you're saying, which is absolutely right, is that what blockchain does in a society is it gives you clear information, but it doesn't take care of the roots. It does. I mean, it's there. It'll make everything you're talking about easier to do if you're going to be better informed, but it doesn't do it. Because essentially, you also need the rules of the game. I mean, DNA, as I tried to explain before, is a system of rules. How do things come together? How does everybody collaborate? All you cells make a liver. All you other cells make an eye. All you other cells make this. What's the rules? Now, in this connection, I would not like to talk about Georgia because I don't know Georgia, but I'm going to transpose your question to my part of the world, Latin America, and specifically Peru, just so as to keep my enemies concentrated in one good geographical place. And I don't know first. Okay, here's what happens. We don't have, generally speaking, what the Anglo-Saxons have, which is a law that is based on judge-made law, common law, which is when you create a culture of very well documented and trained and supervised by the press, and with a great structure of judges that continually adapt the law to reality. We don't have that. So we have to be deliberate about our reforms because we are mainly the results, one way or another, of Roman law or statutory law. So it has to be designed. Now, it can be designed. Look at Germany, look at Japan, look at Switzerland. Very rich countries, so you can do it. But it has to be deliberate. And that involves essentially a democratic reform. It involves a democratic reform. And the belief that you have a rule of law, which is a standard. No such thing as two standards. These little guys, they want standard, microfinance, right? And if you want to, which is good because they're small, but you have to leave the way open to the big. Otherwise, you're like in, I don't know, Ethiopia. You come in and see little people, very skinny, and you say, okay, the solution is little shirts and little pants. But it's okay for today, but they have to grow. Now, how you get that has to do with political enlightenment. It has to do with everybody understanding that a political system is also a corruptible system. And that is why different countries have different ways of making sure that their law responds to reality. Right, so the Swiss have Berlin Lassen. They don't bring out a law unless it is consulted. If it's made nationwide, about 3,000 political sensitive organizations of human rights and chambers of commerce until you pick up the social contract. In other words, you don't make the law. You discover where it is that it's what can everybody agree on. And then you pass it. They also have referendums. But a referendum is not a plebiscite. It isn't Charles de Gaulle or Ferdinand Marcos, particularly saying this or nothing. A referendum means you look at various options, and they have to come from the bottom up. And then you go on that. The Americans don't produce one law without comment and notice periods, which is that you pre-publish the draft law, and people will comment and make notices on it for a year, 2 years, until you're sure you've got it. And if you don't have it, the law is made a sunset law, which is that after a while, it disappears alone because it's not been successful. There isn't one ministry in the United States where there's a secretary of state, the State Department, that doesn't have a counterpart. You have on the one hand, the diplomats, professional, and on the other hand, the National Security Council, which is made up of politicians who give a contrary view. You don't give anybody the monopoly. You've got the Secretary of Treasury and you've got the Office of Management and Budget, which receives complaints on rules that are unoperative and continue to discuss this. In other words, the system is never clean. It's an ongoing process, like the plumbing in your house. It will deteriorate inevitably. How do you keep on feet? The Japanese have. They don't make a rule without a people's congress called it go to their shikai, or supervision by the people's assemblies, which are called the koshikai. Or they don't go to the people in the diet, get primary schools every weekend to talk to their people, so there's a communication. So the first thing you've got to know is that they don't have the Western countries a uniform system, but all of them are concerned with the things you're concerned about, which is how do you get that information in place? And that kind of thing helps if you adapt it to politics. And you can start putting different questions and see what happens. If you do that, then maybe your farmer who says, I don't need the big stuff, my neighbors need it, is right. Because nobody's ever studied the cost of getting into Georgian formal law. Maybe it's terrible. He may be saying the right thing, given his option. But if he is shown other options, or the day somebody comes along and takes it away from him, or the day because he can now split up his land, right? And he gets 7 children, and each one wants to be a farmer, so he splits it into 7 different parts. And 1 generation later, 30 years later, they're not 17 children, but they are 25 children, and they can't live off the land, and they start shooting each other, then you want to get to this. So there will be a time when the small plots or the associations that are small will have to turn into cooperative, larger stuff, because that's the nature of things, with a few exceptions. That's the nature. So just to rejoin what you're saying, you need, the first thing you have to think about is not the rule of law. I will agree with you, but I think it's implicit behind your question. The question is the rule of law good or is it bad? And if it's bad, nobody's going to follow it. And the only way to find that out is by informing yourself what people want. What do people really want? There are people who like to deal with their stuff, not privately, but collectively, and do it successfully. But they have to tell you. And what you've got to do is have a buffet, a smorgasbord, where everybody can do whatever they want to, but it's on record. And then we see what works and doesn't work. Sorry, that's more than this. So it's not about economics only, it's a little bit what you're saying. It's about politics.
Thank you very much. My name is Father Shishiride. I'm training at New Economics School, Georgia. We are partnered with International Property Rights Alliance, and we have participated in research about property rights movements. Although I have some reservations about methodology, how it's calculated, especially in terms of intellectual property rights and things like that. Because Georgia scores very low in this index, but in other all indexes which are scoring economic freedom, we're quite high.
Sorry, keep on talking, I'm here.
So my question is, if we are advocating decentralized monetary system or information exchange, like blockchain, can we integrate this idea with denationalized guarantees for the property rights or not? Because, for instance, from my point of view, blockchain technology as a technology opens a completely new door, no window of opportunity to preserve the property rights without state influence and strong hand, I would say. So, can we change view about property rights or not? And by using view about property rights and the role of the state in this, according to new chances, new technology, new approaches. This is my question. Thank you.
get into the world of property rights, there's a lot of problems that come into place. One is that it is, for example, maybe the United States and in Western Europe, a right-wing word. So it actually means we will protect your right to be private. And that's not what I understand property rights to be. I understand property rights to be the consensus among people of how you want your assets to be owned, exchanged, controlled, and put into place. And therefore, the idea is that this system, first of all, will always work well because it'll give you transparency, whatever you're going to do. But if the idea is to protect your rights well, you're going to need to have an organization or a system of awarding justice that is going to do justice, that can enforce it, and enforce it in a particular way. So this is like a good motor for the car. It's a good idea, or it's good to do it. These are the wheels. Whatever you do, the wheels are going to work. Now the question is, what kind of motor do you put inside? What kind of seats do you put inside? What kind of fuel do you put inside? Which I think is what you're talking about. So it is not a substitute for a good legal system, but it can help you get to a reform because it makes everything visible and available and safe and secure, no matter if you're beginning from stage 0 and you want to go to stage 12. So it's a little bit like the question that we were now talking about, microcredit and the farmer. Information is something that allows you to form an idea and to get the truth, but it does not replace the good justice system. And if you look at all Western countries, you have a different system wherever you go. I mean, you even cross the United States and you have an accident and run over a bicycle in Wisconsin, or you run into a house, you're going to get a different property right and different justice in Wisconsin than you're going to get in Nebraska, than you're going to get in California. It's going to change. People have different ideas on how you work it. So it's a correct problem, but blockchain just simply helps it. It doesn't decide one way or another. You have to create good justice. And you know, the problem of corruption, by the way, and how you should be doing, is a problem that is not resolved. I mean, look at the problems the West is having today. Huge corruption problems. So there is no magic formula. You have to have a political system that allows you to discuss these things freely. I don't know if I've gotten anywhere close to what you were talking about. You forgive me.
Thank you very much. One last question. So,
thank you. First of all, thank you for your very insightful lecture. My name is George Nominadze. I'm representing NGO Free Market. I'm also a student, a PhD student at Indiana State University. So I want to begin my question with the words of Confucius, who said that the beginning of wisdom is call things their proper names. The subtitle of your lecture and actually of your book also is why capitalism triumphs in the West and fails everywhere else. So the question here is how we define capitalism. First of all, I read a few reviews about your book, and as far as I understand, that the main point you are making is that in some countries there is no strict definition and the establishment of property rights, and they are not defended very well. That's the point here. So I think you kind of contradict yourself, because if we do not have property rights, then how is capitalism? And for example, in Georgia, we have calculated it's like 70% of property is still owned by the state. Another thing is that if we will move from that and talking about third world countries, for example, in Georgia, our government frequently say that they are pro-business, but they almost never say that they are pro-free market. Okay, and what's the capitalism in that sense? Capitalism is a free market, or capitalism is whatever we are calling chronic capitalism, or protection toward businesses or business terrorism by the government. So it seems to me that exactly if we first move from the state-owned properties, and we now have something like private property. Then the second question comes, and it is whether we have free market or we have chronic capitalism. It's just the major point why may be this difference. And the question is also about how we are privatizing things, because for example, in Russia during Yeltsin time, there was like huge oligarchies were created because state-owned properties were given by the President Yeltsin toward these businessmen who then helped him to get elected second time. So that's the question. Thank you very much.
It's a very good question. You know, this came out. First of all, the book was written somewhere about 1999, and about the year 2000, it came out. And what was clear is that the Cold War had been won by the West, and it wasn't necessarily going to function in my part of the world. So your publishers helped you put a title that makes the book relevant to at least where you think you were going to sell it. It actually sold much more to Wall Street and in China than it sold back home. So titles are titles. But essentially what's behind that is that the book was read by a man, I believe, called Williamson, who wrote the Washington Consensus, which is an essay on what he thinks the way the West is managing economic power. That's a Washington Consensus. And it had 9 points: stable money, good regulation, etc. Right? Deregulation, rather. And then he reads the book, and just before it goes into print, he puts in 10 points: property rights, because they hadn't thought of it. So I don't know if you ever saw that film with Mel Brooks, where he pretends to be Abraham, and he comes with 15 commandments down the mountain. And one of the tablets has 5 and it breaks. So he says, here are God's 15 commandments. And oh, sorry, no, 10 commandments. The fact is the West talked about it, but did not include it in its programs. Every time, most of the times that you get money from the West to look at property, they look at the physical side, the woods. They don't look at the blockchain part. Okay? Now this is really important. This is really important for you Georgians and what you're going to do, because this question is very relevant. The world spent billions of dollars in mapping territory, and none of them map this. You're mapping this. So in fact, it could be a very big industry, because the notion of property in the word is a terrible word, because you hear Donald Trump. If you watch the American debate saying, I know how to organize property. If you see that beautiful casino in Atlanta, I did it, I designed it. I can build a bridge, I can build a wall. But my Georgian friends are saying is we can build the documentation that says how you get the justice and economic efficiency. So you actually have a lot of resources in the world. We're getting good paper, but the understanding of Anglo-Saxons is, I have a beautiful property in California that I'm going to use to make a sausage factory. It doesn't mean something that is about something, it means something. And you got to get out of it, number one. Number two, the reason I really want to be here is because the BitFury has understood something that to me is crucial. It is that you don't only want to record the paper that exists, you want to record the paper that is not also been attributed, like a wild mistake. Because if Her Majesty's Land Registry of Britain comes in, they will record, they will give you computers that will record paper, but they will not give you the clue to how you create good paper. And good paper, for example, is what are you going to do with 70% of the land that belongs to the state? Who's going to put it into production? That, the recording, unless it has an inferential machine inside, will not help you solve it. So, so I think you reply to your question, it's a very thoughtful question. As far as I can see it, is what transparency does, it is published. Also, it's very important that it get publicity, is that it will make capitalism a competition system versus what you call a crony system. Because capitalism originally is a crony system. Anyway, socialism is a crony system. I mean, look at President Obama, he's gone to Cuba, and he's talked to two cronies. These guys not only own the houses and the docks, they own the whole country. That's crony capitalism too. All these communist elites keep on running the country, that's crony capitalism too. The fact is that humans tend to concentrate power. That is a fact. So what you do is you create a system that understands that just like you generate cancer, you generate concentration, and how do you deal with it depends on how you get informed. And that's it. So you're right, capitalism is not perfect. There is no general definition of it. It just means that you can accumulate wealth in such a way that you can make a difference when you make an investment. That's all it means. And if it's crony or not, it depends on information and good decision.
On behalf of the audience, I would like to thank Dr. De Soto. So thanks for coming also, and thanks for this brilliant session. And so please enjoy coffee. So thank you very much for coming.